Welcome back to FlatsClass University. Captain C.A. Richardson here, and it is a cold January morning, 31 degrees. So I opted not to get in the skiff and go fishing. Instead, I'm going to head down to my studio here, and I'm going to share with you the top 5 mistakes or maybe issues that you might have with spinning reels. And I'm going to give you the solutions. I'm going to give you the answers you've been looking for to fix that problem. So let's go up here and get some work done. All right, like I said in the intro, there are some spinning reel mistakes or issues that plague all of us. I'd say the biggest problem we have is likely wind knots. That's that big tangle of line that ends up being about halfway out the cast, and you're like, why is this happening to me? How do I get these knots? This line must suck. It's not the line. Most of the time it's not the line. I guess there could be some situations where it could be the line, but in most cases it's not the line, it's you. And here's how you beat it. Solution number 1, do not overfill your spool. That's number 1. If you overfill your spool, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have wind knots all the time. It is probably one of the biggest cancers to a spinning reel is having too much line on the spinning reel. The optimum amount of line that you want on the spinning reel is leaving yourself maybe about a 1/16 or sometimes even close to an 1/8 off that lip. If you do that, you're in great shape. Which brings me to number 2. Instead of just making some willy-nilly cast out there and letting that line blow around, feather your cast, okay? If you feather the cast, and there's 2 ways to accomplish this. If you feather the cast, and that means when you make that cast and the bail's open and that line, that helix of line is coming off, you're feathering it with your finger, okay, and following it down. That keeps the line semi-taut as it hits the water. Does it cost you casting distance? Not a lot. You don't have to start feathering until you're almost down to the end. If you can't feather with your pointer finger, cup it underneath and then close the bail, which is number 3. One of the biggest things I see that's a mistake, and I'm on the water a lot with clients coaching them in FlatsClass University, is closing the bail by hand. You want to close the bail by hand because what happens is when this bail is open, which isn't good for the reel, and you do that, you throw slack in the reel right there. And now you're going to reel all of that line back over the top of that slack. The same reason why you feathered it, so that you wouldn't cast it and all the lines coming off. And now you're reeling on loose line for 5 or 6, 7 turns, and then it gets taut. And that loose stuff underneath the tight stuff is what creates those issues. That's why you see those wind knots come out late in your cast. They're not like right away. They usually come out late in the cast. Lots of times by just going like this instead of closing it by hand and tugging on the line, you have a little loop that forms, and then you're reeling over the top of that loop and it gets all kinds of tangles in there. And the next thing you know, you're like, I don't understand why this happened. This is why wind knots happen. Those are the 3 biggest reasons. Now, there could be some other reasons, and we're going to attack that with line twist, but these are the 3 biggest solutions to wind knots. So you might be able to eliminate most of your problems just with this. Now let's talk about the next problem. The number 3 spinning reel mistake or issue would have to be your loss of casting distance. What would cause that? Number 1, probably the weight of the line that you're using. So we'll say line weight line weight too heavy. So when you might use 15, 20-pound braid, you might want to consider trying something like 10-pound braid. Oftentimes in open water situations, you don't need anything stronger if there's not a lot of big structure or cover around than 10-pound braid. I mean, 10-pound braid, really? It probably breaks, honestly, at 15 pounds. So there's no reason to step that line weight up and cost yourself casting distance. The next one would be old line. So many of us are trying to, pinch a few pennies and save money. So we'll keep the braid on there for a year or two, or some of you guys will keep it until all the color is out of the braid. But what happens with that dried out braid is it's not as slick and it doesn't come off the spool as nice anymore. And that will cost you casting distance. So your line weight's too heavy, you're using old line, it's time to make a change. And to me, the most obvious one is an under-filled spool. If you don't have enough line on the spool of your reel, I'll bring back the ballistic again. If this area here is showing like 3/16 or maybe better, maybe even a quarter, you didn't fill it full. You either, ran out of line when you were spooling it, or you've pulled a bunch of bad line off now, and you're just to a point now where it's starting to cost you casting distance. That's a mistake. If you don't buy an extra spool so that when you see that happening and you're on the boat, you just take the cap off, put another full spool on there, that would be the solution to this problem. But loss of casting distance. So far we've covered everything from wind knots to line twists to loss of casting distance. See what's next. Number 4, spinning reel mistake or issue. This really pales in comparison to the problems that you have that you can really control with wind knots and line twists and loss of casting distance. This really is about you most of the time, because the number one problem with controlling fish is going to be, or solution I say, is you've got to have the right drag setting, okay? Drag settings. Drag settings are important for this reason. If they're set too light, you have no control over the fish. None. Okay, they're running wherever they want to, and they're going to get you in a position where you're compromised and they will break you off. 2, most of us set the drag much too tight. We're like testing it like right here at the reel. It's like, here's the reel. Oh, yeah, I don't think one can get away there. And you do it that way. That's not the way you do it. You put this on a rod and you get out there about 20 feet and like put it in the bed of your truck and something, and then you pull on a scale and you try to set it for about 20 to 30% of what your line rating is. So let's just say this is 10-pound diamond braid on this ballistic. I'm going to want to set that for 2.5 to 3 pounds of breaking strength. So it'll have 2.5 to 3 pounds, which is 25 to 30% of its breaking strength. That's what I want my drag set for. I know in my head that diamond 10-pound braid is probably not going to break until it's like 15 or more. So 3 pounds of drag, you put 3 pounds of drag on a couple of pound trout or a redfish, that's all he can handle anyway. And it allows your rod to parabolically work the right way. So you can fight the fish, it's a sporting shot, and you get them to the boat. You have control the whole way. So that's what I mean by drag settings. That's probably one of the number 4. I'd say probably another one is a slack line presentation. Now, when it gets cold outside or we're fishing in current, lots of times we'll let that jig, or let's just say it's a natural bait, drift down with the tide, and it's on a slack line. So it's not taut. There's not any tautness there. Sometimes when that happens, a fish will hit it, and if you can't detect it, which it's harder with a spinning reel to detect, it gets down there, and then all of a sudden you've got this slack line and you realize you've got a fish on it and you're trying to reel it up. Or you're like going up and down with your rod trying to catch it up a little bit in the wind, and the next thing you knew, you didn't realize that line is getting up underneath the spool cap. So it's slipped down and it's up underneath here, and you're just reeling like this and you're not paying attention. The next thing you know, it starts getting tight. You're like, ah. Now you're trying to pull it out and you're compromising the line. And if a fish is on when that's happening, you've lost all control. So slackline presentations, that can get you in trouble with a spinning reel. It can. You got to pay attention. You got to be looking at it all the time. Drag setting, slack presentations. I'd say number 3 would probably be going back to drag settings, and that's adjusting drag in battle. And you see people do this all the time, you know. I've been guilty of it before, where you suddenly realize, oh dear, that fish is running. It's running. It happens all the time in tarpon fishing. He's running. He's going to spool me. And you start adjusting that drag too tight. You overcompensate. You're like zip, zip, zip. You have no idea how many micro clicks you went. That tightens that drag up too fast. It's already hot. The expansion of that drag washer inside of that reel is already warm and it's expanding, and then you're binding it up, and all of a sudden it goes zing pow. We've all heard zing pow. That's on us. So adjusting the drag in battle, definitely a big issue. So those are the ones where a spinning reel can get you in trouble unless you're thinking ahead. And that all starts with number 1 right there, making sure those drag settings are in the right spot. This slackline presentation is just a matter of paying attention. That's it. All right, I've got one more for you, and it's kind of outside the box, so you're going to want to hear about this one. Okay, spinning reel issue number 5. This is in regards to presentation and to actually controlling the lure. Now, I mean, we're speaking in terms of flats fishing, backcountry fishing, things like that. I'd say number 1 would be lure speed. Most beginner and even some intermediate anglers do not realize how much speed is created by a spinning reel, you know, versus a casting reel. So if you're turning a 3000 and it happens to be a higher end 3000, I'm not picking on anybody, but let's just say Shimano Twin Power, and their 3000 size, I mean, that reel's picking up, what, 37 plus inches a line per handle turn? That's a lot. That's 1 yard every turn. So you make a presentation to an area, to a fish, and in 5 turns, you're 15 feet out of that zone just like that. Where if you were using a casting reel that might only be picking up 30 or 32 inches of line, it's a significant difference. Now, it helps you if you're in a situation where you need to burn something, and you might be thinking in your head, well, I can consciously slow down. We never do that. None of us do that. So you have to understand lure speed. So if you make a solution for this, maybe instead of throwing a 4,000 or a 3,000, if there's a difference in the brand that you're using, maybe consider using a 2,500 size, because oftentimes there's not that much difference, and it will make it a lot better presentation in most flats fishing and backcountry situation. And the only time you've got to really worry about it is if your reel's too small is if you're after big fish. But in most cases, I mean, let's face it, most of us are fishing for, you know, a fish. We don't care what size it is. We just want to bend that rod. I'd say number 2 spinning reel issue is it has less accuracy, especially when you're throwing inside your maximum range. I can tell you right now, and you think about it in your head when you fish, your best cast with your spinning reel, your whole setup, is your longest cast, because that is the stroke that you do the most reps with, okay? All day long. It's like someone who's got a great jump shot, just doom, doom, and there's like a groove that they're really good with a jump shot in basketball. But all of a sudden you move them inside that, you know, then all of a sudden it's hard because they can't make the same swing and that same motion that they do over and over and over again. Now all of a sudden a fish has shown up within 25 feet of them and they can't throw over anymore. They can't do this two-handed cast or however they do it. Now all of a sudden it's like it's going to have to be this little pitch or this little side thing. And when you got 7.5 foot of rod out there, that's hard to do. And you're depending on that rod pulling that line off that spool. It has to pull it off. So that's a big, big issue. So I would say that would be the number 2 issue is accuracy. How are you gonna solve that problem? Well, you're going to have to balance your reel, especially if you're with a 2500, to likely a little shorter rod. It has been very in vogue in fishing with spinning gear, especially in the inshore world, to have these 7.5 and sometimes even longer rods. And that's great if every cast you make is an absolute airmail shot. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you buy a 7-foot rod, it will allow you to do all what you need to do. Because if you're quiet in a kayak or you're a wade angler or if you're a skiff angler, a 7-foot rod will give you greater casting accuracy and a lot more variables can happen for you with that rod than a 7.5-foot rod, especially when it comes to working topwater or skipping under trees. 7-foot rod's going to be better at skipping up underneath mangrove limbs and docks. So accuracy. And then 3, the spinning reel issue that you get with a lot of times, I'm going to say, is you're limited in the lines and lures that you can use as opposed to casting gear. Like with a casting reel, you can pack on anything from as light as 15 or 20 pound braid, or sometimes even 10 pound braid with an LTS, all the way up to, I throw 65 pound on these things. So I have a lot of variability. I throw fluorocarbon on these reels. Where when you're talking about a spinning reel, which most of us have, like this type of spinning reel, this is a Daiwa Ballistic 3000. I'm thinking I'm only going to put anything from maybe 6 or 8 pound braid, maybe up to, it'd probably be a stretch. It probably has the numbers on here. Maybe I would put 20 pound braid on here. I likely wouldn't, but maybe I would. But sometimes we want to put too heavy a braid on these, and then we're trying to throw too heavy a lure, because they don't throw heavy lures nearly as well unless you get some giant, you know, spinning reel, like a giant Saragossa or something that is like an 8,000 size. And how long are you going to be able to do that? So you're kind of limited in line and lure size unless you really step up the size of your reel to a big heavy reel. I mean, and a big heavy rod, where in casting gear you would never have to deal with that. Most of the time in casting gear you can stay in that anything from a 100 to a 200 size and throw everything you would ever need in inshore fishing and be fine. You'd literally be fine. But that would be the last of the spinning reel. I'm going to say we put mistakes up here, but it really should be issues. If these are 5 issues that you have noticed in your game, especially those first 3, and this type of information is really helping you, you should come over to FlatsClassUniversity.com, where we go into deep dives, not only in reviewing gear and equipment, but in scenario fishing, breaking down specific areas on how you should approach it, how you should then fish that zone, and then what lures for seasonality that are the best. If that's the type of stuff that you want to see or have at your disposal, you should come on over and see what we have to offer over there. Plus, we have some pretty deep discounts over there on all brands at sodiumusa.com. That's all I've got for you today. See you back here in my classroom tomorrow.